morning. It's Friday morning, 10 o'clock, and here we are again for WG Hub Live. We've got some great speakers this morning. We've got Adrian Seager, our own Adrian Seager from Walkham Financial Services, and we're very, very pleased to have on this morning Emma Needham, partner of Blanchards Bailey solicitors. And so normal rules apply. Q&A session, please, after the speakers. And use the chat box if you really want to. It's there to use, so please do. It's good to see you all again. And I think Adrian's going to kick off now.
Okay, can everybody see the screens? Hopefully. Good morning. Welcome to this webinar. And for my part, I'm going to do a brief discussion on lifetime mortgage as part of our later life financial planning service that we provide. I just wanted to explain the purpose of the webinar really is to offer a little bit of education about this type of lending. I'd like to try and bust a couple of the myths that tend to surround the words equity release. And I'm going to give you some sorts of ideas of how indeed an equity release may be something that you would be interested in or not. And just so that you're aware, it doesn't matter if equity release in itself doesn't apply to you or you don't feel the need to consider that. The later life planning ethic is because of the way the War Government is structured, the service allows for us to be as advisors to also have in-house the expertise of the accountancy world. And indeed, we have a very good relationship, which is indeed why you're going to meet Emma later on, with a local solicitor firm as well, to give you a total joined up service, if you like. But that's the essence of where we're trying to go. So for the moment, I'm just going to talk you through the basic principles of lifetime mortgages or equity release. And as Ian said, any questions at the end, feel free. Yes, we're having technology issues here, namely mine. First start. Can't get it to go to slide 2, Tori.
It should just turn the page for you. Just click on.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. This is what we're going to be talking about. What is a lifetime mortgage? Why you should consider them. And there's different types available to you. I've managed to put in a couple of case studies within the presentation for you, just to give you some ideas, summarizing with a few key factors that everyone should consider before going down this route. And I will cover off a few of the frequently asked questions and a summary at the end. Well, so what is a lifetime mortgage? It's the equity is the value of your home, which is less any mortgage or loan that's already secured against it. Now, a lot of people, by the time they reach retirement, will have indeed cleared their mortgages or may not have any loans at all. Others may still have a mortgage. It doesn't matter. We will talk about the individuals as we go along. But what it does do is it allows you to access this equity and turn that into money that you could use for your retirement in certain cases. Very few criteria to stop you, but one of them that certainly there is that you've got to be older than 55. And although the property must be your main residence, there are a couple of schemes out there that will allow you to do lifetime mortgages on second properties or indeed buy-to-lets. If you want to know more about that specific sort of thing, you need to obviously contact me after the webinar. One of the myths there, you do keep ownership of your home. You do not sell any part of your home with a lifetime mortgage. It's 100% yours, so therefore any money that you put into it will remain in your estate. The interest on the loan that you are taking out is charged, but it's only charged on the amount that you borrow. And you have a choice. You can either add that to that loan amount, or you can indeed make repayments. The loan is actually repaid officially when your home is sold. usually when you follow your passing or you've moved into a long-term care, but they give you time for that. So there's no hot sales in the market. Why consider equity release? When I was putting this presentation together, I was trying to look at the most obvious ones that people think they are used for, and those are those that I've listed here: home improvements or adapting to the homes, paying off existing loans and debts. That's becoming an increasing one for those that were unfortunate enough to get caught in the interest-only mortgage saga and didn't have a repayment vehicle of their mortgages. Some people sadly need additional retirement income, whether that be through bereavement and their partner's pension passed with them, or indeed they simply didn't have the ability to make sufficient savings to provide a decent pension when they actually retired. Some people now are looking at lifetime mortgages for later life care at home. Not everybody wants to go into a care home, as you can understand. Some people want their own independence, and so they want to have care at home, and then equity release can be a way for doing that. Helping friends and family get on the housing ladder. This is becoming an increasingly popular way of making the family wealth work for the family. That's both for the elderly and for the young ones in the family. We are seeing people now taking money out of their residences and formally gifting it to the generation below, or even 2 generations below, which helps obviously those generations get onto the property ladder. And indeed, some people are doing this to alleviate themselves of the potential inheritance tax liabilities that they will leave behind when they pass on. So again, an interesting way to think. One of the things I've not put on here is, that makes it clear, is that if you take money away from the property via way of an equity release, it's up to you what you do with it. Now, I do know that 1 or 2 of you watching today are members of a car club, and I can understand why, because if you've got a burning desire to restore a classic car and you've got there at home, the one thing that usually stops you is having the money to buy that car in the first place. And as we all know, that restoring cars is an expensive proposition, because you never know quite what you're getting. But the point of the matter is, these equity release schemes can help you raise capital to do whatever you wish. We do get quite a lot of inquiries for people who want to borrow money for a holiday, or they want to move to be nearer their family. There are quite a few reasons why people might wish to consider this, all of which are pretty valid. The uses of equity release as general have an increasing need coming forward, because we're living longer. And that's where the later life financial planning comes to its own, because nowadays people are retiring in their mid to late 60s, and life expectancy is sometimes 20, possibly 30 years on past that. And some people have worked for 40 years, so they're retired for 30. That does require funding. And this is where equity release has become an increasingly important tool for people to do that. Most people are finding that estate and occupations alone are not enough to allow them to live the life they want. Whilst the state pension can be regarded as your basic needs, as anybody who's living on a state pension will tell you, that's not enough to actually enjoy life. Although I do accept that equity release is not suitable for everyone, but it is a way of making a real difference to the quality of life. In certain circumstances, if you are on some form of means-tested benefits, an equity release could affect those. And obviously, it may affect the inheritance that people may or may not be expecting at a later date. There are 2 options within a lifetime mortgage regarding the interest. You can have the interest rolled up, which means that you can borrow the money and effectively create the debt, and the interest will just be added to that debt. You do not have to make repayments on that loan. And the interest plus the loan will be repaid once your property is sold on the death of the final owner of the property, i.e. the second life. Some people don't like the idea of that, and they would like to borrow money, but they want to keep paying the repayments. Again, it's not essential, but you can do that. And you can do it. Some schemes allow you to do it on a monthly basis. Some allow you to make ad hoc payments. Again, entirely down to the borrower's choice, not the lender's. The lump sum can be taken at the start of the mortgage term, or alternatively, they can take a lower lump sum at the beginning and have effectively a drawdown facility, like a checkbook facility almost, for the remainder of a loan. It allows them to take, they could, if they want to, people could take smaller amounts on a regular or periodic basis, bearing in mind that interest is only payable on the money that's actually been drawn down. The only real shortcoming on that is that the interest rates are fixed for life generally on the advance, but if you go for the drawdown option, the interest rate on the amount that you draw down is secured or agreed at that time and may be higher or lower than what your original loan was. I put a couple of case studies in here just to give you a brief sort of look at what some people have done to improve their family wealth in the way it worked for them. A Mr. and Mrs. Barclay who wanted to borrow £335,000. Might sound a lot, but it was to pay their existing mortgage. They wanted to go to buy a new holiday home, and they wanted to increase their overall standard of living. But because they've now got the mortgage, they can do this. They can borrow the money against it, go and do that secondary home, and they make themselves quite happy. This other one's more relevant for the more discernible of you. Mr. and Mrs. Cern, but they required only a loan of £53,000, but it was simply to help their daughter purchase her first property, for which she needed £90,000 to do so. They'd only been able to raise £40,000 on their own, so the parents were helping to make up the difference. And on that basis, the whole family were then happy because the family tree would continue, and the children and the parents were both satisfied where they were. There are a couple of other scenarios that I could tell you that, particularly with the later life planning, often people will have been very prudent through their lives, and they've managed to build themselves a very nice nest egg. Their properties are all paid for, they're living quite well within their means, and then during the later life planning review that they were having, they've discovered that they've got an inheritance tax liability looming for their loved ones. And quite often people are not quite sure what to do with that, because they don't want to necessarily sell up their home and move somewhere else. They don't necessarily want to give too much money away because they don't quite know what they're doing. But at the same time, they also would rather not volunteer to pay quite so much tax to the Chancellor due to inheritance. And indeed, a lifetime mortgage can be of assistance in this way, in a simple way that, for example, one case we've done recently, they borrowed £100,000. Seems a lot. They didn't want to pay the interest on that. They borrowed the loan. They put the money that they actually drew down into an appropriate investment, partly to attract some business property relief. So after 2 years, it was outside of their estate, but they also put the balance into a trust, and along with the accountant and the solicitors, along with the accountants and the solicitors, they also put forward a trust package for a family trust. All in all, the £100,000 after 7 years will have actually fallen outside of their estate and saved them a £40,000 tax bill. The interest on the £100,000 took the best part of 4 years to be added to the account. So the sums worked in their instances. And just as a matter of interest, the interest rate that they're paying on that loan for life, fixed, is 2.32% on an annual rate. The actual rate obviously does reduce the size of the estate. And as I said earlier about the fact it may affect the means tested benefits of those that are on means tested benefits. So you have to think carefully about doing this. Some people will use equity to consolidate debts. because for whatever reason they ended up there. For example, people also suffer when the loved one dies and their pension dies with them, or even sadly, more common these days is where somebody may have sadly had the marriage break down, they're a divorced partner, and they simply cannot afford to live on their own, but they're in a house that's worth a fair bit of money and they don't want to move. So you can see there are quite a few reasons why people may wish to consider this type of service. The equity rate is based upon the property, and there are fees involved, but we can minimise a lot of those, and in fact, some cases we can get you even free valuations. Obviously, the solicitor has to be involved. There has to be some form of fees and advice that you've been given. But the good news is that any cash released is tax-free. But just be aware of the fact that if you then invest it somewhere, the interest is liable to be registered for tax. So you do still own your home. That's one of the questions that are often asked. And you can move to another property, provided the property that you're going to is acceptable for the lender. And it's pretty much the same standard acceptance that you would for an ordinary mortgage. Some of these plans allow you to repay the whole loan and the interest, and they also allow you to pay it all back. But they don't like you doing it straight away. There is an early repayment charge system in place, and it typically is 8 years. If you borrow some and the property value increases, bear in mind you own 100% of it, you can indeed probably go back to them and ask for some more. You can leave the inheritance. If some people are worried that by taking out a lifetime mortgage, they are in fact going to pay the entire inheritance to the family, but some schemes even allow you to have inheritance protection. So you can protect part of the value of the estate to ensure that no matter what, there will always be something from the property when you pass. Who sells the house at the end? If you go into care, obviously your family will do it for you. If you pass away, then it was who's been nominated in your estate via your will, but your solicitor will talk to you about that. So in summary, a lifetime mortgage does give you access to cash in your home, which is known as equity. You still own your home. It does provide money to help them make the most of retirement. And of course, this is all delivered by regulated and independent advice from people such as myself who are deemed to be specialists. If any of you are interested in any further talks about specifically equity release, that's fine. We do have brochures, and we do offer a free initial meeting without charge and without obligation for you to talk to us on a personal basis. And I believe that at the end of the seminar, you will be able to pick up my contact details. I think I've run about on time. Sorry.
But anyway, this is live. This is WG Hub Live. And thanks ever so much, Adrian, for doing that presentation. Great stuff, lots of information. And I'm sure people will start to get some ideas as to what they can do. So, delighted to have Emma Needham on this morning. Morning, Emma.
Morning.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for that, Adrian. That was a really great and useful talk. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Also not great with the technology. So here we go. There we go. Right. So I'm talking about later life care and estate planning. One of the points or a couple of points I wanted to pick up from Adrian's talk is he made the point that people are living longer and longer these days, and the fact that, you know, we may need to have family help us sell property in the future. So what's really important, I think, when you're thinking about that, is to make sure that your legal affairs are in order as well. As much as thinking about how you're going to support yourself financially later in life, you need to think how you are going to achieve continuity and make sure people can continue to support you as you move through your life. So my next slide picks up on property and financial affairs lasting power of attorney. And essentially this is, you know, who's going to represent you later on when perhaps either you've lost the capacity to make decisions about your property and finances yourself, or indeed you're 99.9 years old and frankly you just want your son, your daughter, whoever, perhaps a professional advisor, to start helping you out because it's all getting physically a bit challenging as well. So as I've said there, property and financial affairs power of attorney really are as important as making a will. The question I often ask people is, if you don't have a property and financial affairs lasting power of attorney in which you have nominated people to look after your property and finances for you, who is going to do it? If you can't do it, how do you propose managing your affairs? And really, the alternative is no good. You're leaving it potentially to the Court of Protection to appoint a deputy who you will not have chosen necessarily to manage your affairs for you. So one of the ways to think about property and financial affairs powers of attorney, I think, is that it's a way of retaining control. You choose, whilst you have capacity, who you want to be your attorneys, and most importantly, the people that you trust to do that. So a couple of or a few points that I've highlighted there, or questions I've asked, is what does it cover? Many of you will probably know, and it is essentially, as it says on the tin, so to speak, that it's to make sure that you've got people there who can sell property for you, who can set up direct debits to pay for your care, who can deal with investments on your behalf and make decisions about equity release perhaps, who can get money, simply get money out of the bank for you. So it's really all embracing really in terms of what it covers. As I've touched on earlier, you know, you get to choose who you want your attorneys to be. Often for a couple with children, that'll be each other plus their children. For some people, it may be friends or family or extended family. And for others, it may be professional advisors. If you don't have family that you would want to engage in this kind of role, then you can let professionals do it for you. You also set out in the document how you want your attorneys to act. So is it that you want them to make decisions together? Or are you happy for your attorneys to act independently of one another? You can specify this all in the document. And you say when you want your attorneys to act. So in particular for the property and finances, you can limit its use so that it can only be used when you've lost mental capacity, or you can extend its application so that, as I touched on earlier, you're 99.9 years old and you just want the kids to get on with it. You can allow them to do that once the document's been registered with the court. And what I would say is that, as you know, people need to move on and get this done really, because as I mentioned earlier, the deputyship application to the Court of Protection is more costly, it's more time consuming, and your deputy is assessed and has to report to the Court of Protection on an annual basis. So it's much more onerous to have a deputyship order in place. The other point is that through the property and financial affairs power of attorney, you can limit the assets that your attorneys are able to access and exercise their power over. So if, for instance, you have business assets and you wouldn't want family members dealing with that, you can have separate powers of attorney that deal with your business versus your individual assets. You can include guidance for your attorneys, so you can explain to them that you would rather that your attorneys consulted with one another or a particular individual. You can set out to them that they can delegate to investment and fund managers on your behalf. And essentially, as I said, don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it and hope that you'll be able to continue to manage your affairs. Make the decision now, retain control over your affairs from this point, and set out who it is that you want to manage your affairs if you're in a situation where you're unable to do so. I think as well, I mean, I've talked about the property and financial affairs lasting power of attorney. The health and welfare lasting power of attorney essentially complements that. This is making sure that you have all aspects of your life covered and you have people making the decisions for you that you trust. So this will cover medical and social care decisions. It can go as far as life-sustaining treatment decisions. So would you want your family to be your voice in that scenario? You can provide them with detailed guidance on that, and that is certainly something that we do. So I think, you know, going back to what Adrian said, it's really important that you're thinking about your future financial planning, and part of that is making sure that you're facilitating the right people to support you throughout your life. So that's property and financial affairs, lasting powers of attorney. The next slide moves on to looking at thinking about funding your care. So that's something that obviously the equity release side of things can assist with. One of the questions that frequently I get asked is whether somebody can gift their main residence during their lifetime to their children. It's obviously their main asset, or for a lot of people it's their main asset, and they want to make sure that they're protecting that for future generations. We don't advise it, and I've highlighted there really the three main reasons why that is. So the first being deliberate deprivation of assets. Now, if you go into care at a later stage in life and you've given away something like your main residence, the local authority are going to scrutinise gifting like that. They are going to question why you've given your property away to your children. And more often than not, when children are set up, they're living in their own homes, they have families of their own, they've got good jobs, it's going to be very difficult to argue that you've done it for any other reason than to get that asset outside of your estate for care fees. And one of the other questions, or people often say to me, is, well, if I do this 7 years prior to going into care, then that means that'll be okay. That is not the case. So the 7-year rule applies for inheritance tax. It does not apply for the local authority when they're looking back at gifting. If they think that they can identify a deliberate deprivation of assets, that could be 20 years ago, and they can include that asset, the value of that asset within your estate when it comes to doing the financial assessment. And essentially that will then pass on down to the beneficiaries of that asset who may find themselves having to pay for your care. So you really need to think carefully before you do anything like that. On a very basic level as well, you're really, you know, arguably risking your own future security. Your residence is probably your security for the future going forward and being able to pay for your care. You don't necessarily know what your family circumstances are going to be in the future. If you pass an asset to a child, your main residence to your child, they later divorce or become bankrupt, that is then an asset of theirs that is included in that process. So, you know, you really need to think carefully before doing that. And that's why it's important to, I think, speak to your solicitor, speak to your financial advisor, and make sure that you really are considering all the options before you do something as drastic as that, which, as we say, we don't advise. The alternative, though, on the brighter side, is that you can protect a share of your estate from being used up in care fees, and that is by incorporating trusts into your wills. So I won't go into the technical aspects of it, but essentially by incorporating trusts into your wills and couples taking action now, whilst you're both still alive, you can make sure that you are looking after the surviving spouse for the rest of their life. You can ring fence money on the first death for the children, so it doesn't all amalgamate in the survivor's estate, and therefore if the survivor goes into care, exposed to being used up in care fees. You put it into the trust and it is ring fenced so that on the survivor's death, they can then, the assets that have gone into the trust can then pass on to the children. And it's accepted under current legislation at the moment. Sadly, no crystal ball, so you can't tell if this is going to be the situation in 10, 15 years time, but at the moment it's accepted under current legislation. So take action now, review your will and look at if you can do anything within your will to protect a share of your estate from care fees. So then moving on, I think the next point is if you're in quite a good position financially and you're worried about paying inheritance tax on your death, one of the other key things to do is to make sure you're reviewing your will. And as I've pulled out here is that, the sort of things that you're thinking about is, as a single person, does your estate exceed 325,000? As a couple, would it exceed 650,000 on second death, on the basis that you are passing your estates to one another on first death? Are you then thinking about passing your estate to children, to stepchildren, and then if either of them passed away, onto grandchildren in substitution? If so, you might be eligible for additional inheritance tax allowances called the residence nil rate band, which for a single person can increase your allowance to 500,000 and for a couple to 1 million. So, but the key point here is that in order to take advantage of those inheritance tax allowances, you need to make sure that your will allows for it. So you've got to review your will. If you haven't done it, I would say in the last 5 years, it's worth having a look. Because as I've put in the last point there is an issue if you are providing for grandchildren in substitution where we commonly see it, and you are trying to specify an age at which they can inherit over the age of 18 years. Now, unfortunately, 18 years, it seems quite young, so a lot of grandparents will want to say, okay, if I've got a grandchild inheriting in substitution, I would want them to inherit perhaps at 21 or 25. Now, if that came into effect, then potentially you will have lost the benefit of the residence nil rate band because the legislation doesn't allow for it. You can come and speak to us and we can talk about other mechanisms that you can incorporate to enable you to take the benefit of the residence nil rate band. But it's important, the key thing is to review your will. And as I've said there, work with us, work with Ward Goodman to develop an estate planning strategy and make sure that we're working together to get it right for you. So that's really just a very brief whistle-stop tour of some of the key issues to start thinking about. And I think if you've got any questions after this presentation, please do send them across. And I've just put some details here of how you can get in touch. So you can call me on that number there, which is my direct dial, or my email address, and we can have appointments. At the moment, a lot of appointments are being done over the telephone, but likewise, as Adrian said, you can have a free half-hour consultation over the phone and we can decide how to move things forward for you. So that's it. I hope that was helpful. Let me have questions in due course.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Emma. That was great. Great presentation. And I think it's given us a lot of food for thought there. I can see the panelists ready to join in. Our own Gareth Simon here. There we go, Director of Financial Services. Very experienced in putting all these things in place. Working with Emma. I'm sure they could do some great stuff with our viewers today. So we've also got our own Matt McCallum. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi. Matt's a tax advisor and works obviously closely with Adrian as well. And so if you've got any sort of taxing questions this morning, I'm sure Matt will try and help. But let's move on. I think we've got some questions already, so please keep them coming. We've got a bit of time, and so keep the old questions coming. We've got one of our great regulars on WG Hub Live has asked a question. Always appreciate your questions, Mike. So here we go. So I think it probably is a good one for you, Emma, to kick you off, get you warmed up. So is a living will as effective as making a lasting power of attorney?
In short, no. So a living will is very limited. It's going to cover decisions relating to life-sustaining treatment, essentially. To be more expansive and make sure, so this is kind of focusing on aspects of your health and care. So to cover all aspects of health and care, you really need to be doing a health and welfare lasting power of attorney. Now, it is possible to reference a living will within that document if you have one in place already, but the health and welfare lasting power of attorney does cover such decisions as life-sustaining treatment. And in fact, arguably, you've probably got more capacity to set out guidance to your attorneys within that. So I would say they're not bad, that they're useful for that specific issue, but if you want people in place to make decisions on an increasingly important basis, I think, particularly about your care, then you need a health and welfare lasting power of attorney.
It's a good question from Mike. Obviously, he owns and runs one of the leading care homes in Bournemouth, so it's probably a very relevant question there, I should think.
Yes.
But no, absolutely. We've got another question. Here we go. So another one of our regulars, Alison, says, I have a small limited physiotherapy company and shortly will take my son on as an employee. Can I gift him some of my shares as part of early inheritance? Here we go. So who wants to handle that? Gareth?
Question that, yeah.
What do you think, Matt? Shall we bring Matt in here? So he's got a business asset here. What do you think? So can you give him some? Can I gift him some of my shares as part of my early inheritance? Oh, can you turn your microphone up? We're not going to be able to hear him, are we? There you go, Matt.
No.
Can we hear him? Hello, Matt?
No. We'll have to come back.
Oh, we're going to have to come back to that one. Alison, we'll get you. The answer is obviously you can gift shares. I think the trouble is with business assets, there's a lot more to it. And I think Adrian will agree there.
Yes.
I think the key thing there, isn't it, is to make sure that you're taking holistic advice. So yes, we can say now you can give away your shares in your company during your lifetime and it potentially fall outside of your estate for tax purposes, but there may also be good reasons not to, because business assets can attract business property relief and the such like. So what you need to do is make sure you're taking proper advice so that we can ascertain what you've got there and is it sensible to give that asset away, or are there other things that you could be giving away that are better for you from a tax position. So I think the message here is to take some advice.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to do with age here as well, and how long you've been in business, how far you are down the line. Obviously, I do a lot of this work myself in terms of restructuring businesses and getting shares over to other family members. And I think the one thing I always say, obviously there can be a big motivational factor with shares, being part of the business. And how that's best done is another matter. It's not necessarily the gifting of your shares. So I think that's the point, that there is a bit more to it with business assets than necessarily your own sort of, personal home and property. So I'm sorry I can't give you a direct, straight answer there, Alison. But we'll have to have a chat afterwards. So Matt can now hear us. Hello, Matt.
No.
Okay, oh, fine. Okay. Right. So next question. So between husband and wife who have joint bank accounts, etc., and you trust each other, husband and wife, there we are. I'll just reiterate the question. Husband and wife, joint bank accounts, trust each other. Do you really need this LPOA?
Yes, really, because unfortunately there is the risk that the bank gets, so in the future this is, if one of the couple were to lose capacity, the risk is that the bank get wind of that, and in order to protect the individual's interest in that joint account, they may freeze, they have the ability to freeze that joint account. So it doesn't always happen, but it is a risk that is there, and it's not really a risk that's worth running just if you can put in place a property and financial affairs power of attorney. And then you need to be thinking forward as well. If one of you were to go into care, there may be good reason at that point to split your assets out, your bank accounts, so that you're making it clear for financial assessments what belongs to each of you. And so, at that point, then somebody's going to need to be able to manage that person's account. So you would need to have a property and financial affairs power of attorney in place then. So I just wouldn't leave it to chance. I would just get it done.
I know, we probably, that there's probably a lot of people thinking, well, is this just is this an expense that I'm having that, that I could just put off a few more years and get closer to the point?
Yeah. I mean, the way I often suggest people think about this, or powers of attorney, is like an insurance policy. So it's one of those things that we don't really want to have to pay for. But the reality is if the worst happens, then it's there to back us up and make sure that, when we're in a difficult situation, we're able to get the support that we need. And that's the way to think about a power of attorney. The hope is that you won't ever need to use it, but the reality is that more and more people are. And what I find, really difficult and quite upsetting for clients is when I've met them at a point in time when they've had capacity, they haven't wanted to do these documents, and then I meet them some years down the line, they haven't got capacity to do powers of attorney anymore, they need people to manage their finances, and they're looking at an application to the court, and it could be anybody that's being appointed to look after things for them. So it's just not really worth leaving it.
And I also think, I talk about this with Gareth quite a lot sometimes, is that we've all been subject to these positions, and I've had 3 or 4 times myself, even in the last few years, where fortunately the majority of those were did have an LPA. But one was very, very late, I have to say, and sort of almost caused us real difficulty to get it. And as somebody who then has to take on the affairs, it does feel it's a great thing to have in place.
Absolutely. I'll probably just jump in there, Ian. It's a good point, because I was trying to explain it to a client the other day that whilst there is a little bit of upfront cost, the actual beneficial cost is that you can then manage the investments potentially at a later date. Now, if you haven't got the ability to manage or make an investment decision at a later date, it could be very, very expensive. We've just been through a very volatile period for the investment markets. Now, if you haven't got a power of attorney in place and you haven't been able to make strategic investment decisions over that period, that's 10 or 20% potentially swing either way. And that's a very expensive mistake. So absolutely, I think make the investment now, because certainly from our point of view, from an investment point of view, it can be very detrimental if it's not there.
Yeah, and also just pulling on the investment side of things, it's really important that the wording within the powers of attorney allow your attorneys to appoint people to look after investments on their behalf, because otherwise it can be quite limiting, because in theory your attorneys can't delegate their powers to other people. So you need to make sure that the wording is correct within the powers of attorney, or there are the right instructions within there to allow your attorneys to delegate to to yourselves.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I mean, in terms of cost, obviously, time goes on, the inflation goes on. Actually, your cost now, it's probably less than it will be in 20 years' time. Well, I don't know. It depends how legal costs go. If
I can put it into a little bit.
So,
Yeah, I can put it into a bit of context, in so much as doing both through our firm, doing both types of power of attorney, so health and welfare and property and finances, getting them prepared and registered at the court is cheaper than doing one deputyship application for a property and financial affairs deputy. So it's cheaper to do the lasting powers of attorney than leave it to chance and hope that you won't need it. And if you end up when you in a situation where you do, it's going to cost you more money.
Well, so in the words of an old comedian, not a lot of people know that.
No.
I don't think they do, actually.
Yeah.
So it's clearly an issue. So we've had another regular. We got Andrew here. He said it's clearly something worth considering. So I think the point's got across. So, what percentage of people do you think have them?
Oh, that's a tricky one, but I would say probably, I mean, just looking at my own client base, I would say 75% of the appointments I have, we come away with powers of attorney being prepared as well.
Sorry, can you repeat that? How many percent?
I would say probably about 75% of the appointments I'm having where we're starting afresh with people coming in to review their wills and talk about powers of attorney. I would say about 75% of them are probably doing powers of attorney as well as getting their will in order. Because
but I mean, that's a large percentage. So people who are seriously looking at their and doing some property planning end up with about 3/4 of them end up with this situation.
I think, and it might be that they don't end up using them, but they're preparing themselves in case they do.
But that's a bit like house insurance. You don't want your house burnt down, but you just hope to, you do pay the premium, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. And, it's just, to some extent, your will is important, but you're not here when your will is being administered by your executors. The message that I think the thing that people need to understand about powers of attorney is this is looking after you whilst you're alive. You need to make sure that people are in a position to do that for you. It's going to directly affect you.
Yeah, and it really does help the beneficiaries, doesn't it? The people looking after your estate. Like I said, I felt much better having it in place, I have to say. And that's excellent. So we have got another question. So, it's quite an open question though. At what age would you recommend someone to implement an LPOA?
Well, that's a difficult one, because I think it's not age dependent. So
a young man like me, should I have one?
Yes. But arguably, see, I'm young and sprightly still, I could have one too. If something happens to me, I need people there who can look after my money and make decisions about my health and care as well. But often the trigger point, I think, for people getting powers of attorney in place is that they have people in a position who can do that for them. So a family who, you've got two kids, husband, wife, two kids, whatever, they're adult children, at that point, you may as well do a power of attorney. Those are the people that are probably going to look after your affairs for you. So just get it done.
Yeah. So once you've got some trusted people coming up behind you, if you like, in next generation, start thinking about that.
Yeah, I would say so. And you can do it at a younger age. It just means that you may need to change it in the future, but that's not impossible either.
I mean, it's an interesting one with having business interests as well as personal interests. We with Gareth, don't we? That some people have got really complex affairs at quite a young age.
Yes.
Actually, that's a good point, Ian. One of my clients asked Emma, "Is there a benefit of having a business power of attorney alongside a personal power of attorney?"
I think so. If you want particular individuals to deal with your business assets, and it wouldn't be appropriate for perhaps your family to be dealing with that, then yes, you ought to consider putting a power of attorney in place specifically to deal with those business assets. Because it's quite, it can be quite overwhelming to take something like that on. So you need to make sure you've got the right people named to be able to deal with your assets appropriately.
Yeah,
we often ask the question, don't we, Gareth, whether actually even just basic the shares have actually been considered in a will, let alone.
Yeah, but I think you make a good point, Emma, that actually, dealing with the personal investments or assets is one thing, but perhaps if you've got a complicated business structure, then having a fellow director or shareholder to perhaps be your business power of attorney may be more appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely.
But can it be more straightforward, the business power of attorney?
I have to say, I haven't done many of them myself, but you can limit as I sort of picked up on my presentation, you can limit the power of your attorneys to dealing with particular aspects. So it could be quite simple in so much as you just say, this is what you're dealing with.
Just the business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
So we're getting some more sort of, we've got a couple of questions sort of ranging around equity release. I think there's a lot of people, they generally are worried. They see the adverts on the TV maybe, but they're not sure who to trust about equity release. And a lot of people just say it's not for them. I think, Adrian, you went through the question as to why it might not be for them, but why perhaps a general financial review could help.
Indeed, that's actually the point. Equity release is a tool within the later life planning service that we provide that can be used, but of course it's more important that you actually review your financial situation. That's why I work with like Matt and Gareth as part of the service, and that's why Emma's involved, because we all have a part to play in securing a client's financial future. So there's no harm in meeting us. That's why we try actively to encourage this initial meeting, this free of charge meeting, just to see whether your circumstances would benefit from the later life planning review. And very rarely do we come across clients where there isn't a lot we can do. It's I think you agree, Gareth, it's pretty unusual.
It is, because I think, equity release is just one solution. It's one approach. Invariably we find that actually it's multiple solutions, multiple planning opportunities. Working with Emma, so it's a combination of potential equity release, looking at the wills. One thing we haven't touched on, but I think I will just raise it, Ian, because Chris Williams, one of my clients, raised a question about pensions and the importance of pension planning in estate planning and potentially later life planning. The question Chris asked was, are they still very tax efficient for inheritance tax purposes? Because he read about a case recently where HMRC was looking to potentially look to tax the pension fund. Well, I can confirm, no, absolutely, pension funds are still, beneficial from an inheritance tax planning point of view. That particular case, which Emma's probably familiar with, the Staveley case, that only related to a transfer of a pension whilst the individual was in ill health. So the transfer happened 2 years before death. So that was a unique case, Chris. So don't worry about that. From a general point of view, pensions, we're still viewing pensions as a way of transferring wealth down the generations in a very inheritance tax friendly manner.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of tools around that, haven't we? It's just not just about contributions, really, is it?
No, and invariably clients now are looking at their pensions potentially to complement the will planning and trust planning, because it is in effect a wealth transfer vehicle, your pension plan now. The new modern rules have changed the landscape completely. But Chris wanted to ask that particular question, which is a good question, Chris, but that you don't have to worry. It only relates to a certain set of circumstances. HMRC have not changed their stance on pensions and the tax efficiency of pensions. No, but it's a really big complex area, and unless you're taking advice from people who are on it, that they're alive to the situations, then it's easy to get behind, don't you think, with the regulations, Gareth? It is. And one thing I would probably add to that particular point on the pensions is something Emma and I discuss quite regularly with clients, is just to make sure your death benefit nominations are in place for your pension. It's something that's missed by clients all the time, and it's vitally important that it's reviewed, because it may be that a nomination isn't in place, which is not great, but more likely a nomination is out of date. So what I'd strongly suggest is, as part of your review with your financial advisor or your legal advisor, you just look at the death benefit nomination, just to ensure that pension funds follow the route you want it to go down. And I suppose that's the true of the life policies as well, isn't it, Adrian?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Sorry, Gareth, you can go on.
I think we've just got another question.
We're going to know. So what? Oh, here we go. So from Sally, what are the advantages of a discretionary trust versus a family trust?
So I can probably answer that one. A family trust is a bit of I suspect what you're talking about there is a life interest trust. That's not a family trust in itself. Isn't a recognised trust, but people commonly use that term to talk about. It's often referred to in a way to protect your estate against care fees, which I referred to earlier. It depends on your circumstances, I think, is the basic answer. Family trusts, or life interest trusts as they're properly known, are useful for care fee planning. Perhaps if you're two families that have come together, they're a useful way of ring fencing money for your respective children under your wills, where you've got a second marriage. Discretionary trusts are really useful mechanisms, though, for wealth planning under your will, making sure that you can drip feed money down to future generations, perhaps skipping generations. They're useful for business planning, keeping assets outside of a spouse's estate, perhaps, that attract certain inheritance tax reliefs. So I think the crux of it is it comes down to your circumstances. Both have their value.
Yeah, absolutely, Emma. I would just add to that. I think the big benefit of a discretionary trust that we find with a lot of clients is there's a wide range of beneficiaries. So there's not a particularly named absolute beneficiary. There's any number of beneficiaries, and then the trustees have ultimately got the discretion who to apply the capital and income to. Now, generally speaking, where you've got bigger families and more complex situations, the discretionary trust can be more appropriate because it gives the trustees more flexibility. Yeah. Where it's a family trust and there's absolute beneficiaries named, then obviously they then become entitled to the capital income at a certain date or age, and that can't be changed. So that may or may not be beneficial. So again, it's a very broad question, and it's probably one that we could probably take offline and discuss further. But it again, as Emma says, it depends on the whole objective, your goal. If you want more flexibility, then I think the discretionary trust probably would be the route to go down.
Okay. Well, that's great. Well, thanks, team. It looks like we've reached the end of today's session. I really would like to thank Emma. Thank you for today. That was absolutely wonderful.
No problem. I enjoyed coming to it.
Great, and we hope to see you again.
Yes. Yeah. No, it was good.
Yeah, excellent. And I hope you enjoy the summer. So, and thank you, Adrian, for your presentation. I know you were looking forward to do a series of presentations out and about this summer, but obviously that wasn't going to be due to the COVID situation. But thanks very much for putting your best step forward here today.
Sorry about the phone.
Oh, that's right. These technicalities, hey. But no, absolutely. Thanks ever so much, Adrian, and that's great. And sorry you couldn't hear Matt today, but I'm sure he'll be back. And of course, Gareth, thank you so much for coming on again. So I'll just tell you a little bit more about what's going to happen going forward. I would like to thank all the professionals that have taken part as panelists, as presenters on WG Hub Live this summer. We've really enjoyed putting the events together. Obviously, there's been some more technical issues. We've had some fun, but I would like to thank the whole WG marketing team for what they've produced for this series of WG Hub Live events. What we're intending to do is to keep WG Hub live. The hub itself will continue to be updated with latest advice, guidance, and we'll be moving more into more general advice aspects. And I think you've got a flavour of what we can do today with the likes of bringing Emma on and Adrian and Gareth and Matt. And we look forward to producing some more of these type events on some more general subjects. Hopefully, we can all come out the other side of the pandemic and we can sort of enjoy some other discussions about other topics. So thank you all to all your viewers who have come on every week for the last few weeks. We have many stalwarts, and so thank you to them. We are taking a summer break now, but we will be back in the autumn with a series of hopefully COVID unrelated events. If we still have to bring some on, then we will. But otherwise, I wish you all the best for the summer, and thanks very much for joining.